Okay, guys. Today I would like to talk about MIDI files. Okay. Now we've talked about MIDI data in general, like notes, note on, note off, velocity, modulation, pitch bend, all of those different parameters, which are all of the individual note events, right? Now, when we have all of these note events together, we have the ability to export all of this as a single file called a MIDI file. Sometimes you see it listed as .mid, sometimes you see it as .midi. There's absolutely no difference between the two. And in fact, one time I think it was an MID, and Pro Tools wouldn't open it, and I just added the I at the end of the file extension, and it worked. So they're basically the same. I think most are just shortening it to MID these days, though. So anyway, what a MIDI file does, it's basically a data file that allows you to transfer all this MIDI information from one platform to another, and you can edit it just like it was originally in that DAW. So that's what we're gonna do. Something else I'd like to mention is general MIDI sounds. Now, every computer has general MIDI, and what general MIDI is basically stock sounds that every computer has. And the best way I can describe this is when you open a browser on the internet and the font is there for the different text. That font is a font that your computer has. That when they created the website, there's certain fonts that they know every computer will have, so that when you open the browser, it will work. Now, if you open a browser and you don't have that font, your computer will select a font that it thinks is close to that font. And that's the best way that I can describe general MIDI. Is it's going to look at the file, and it's going to look at these individual tracks, and it's going to try to figure out a sound that will work. Now, not every DAW will load sounds, but if you try to play a MIDI file like in iTunes, for example, it's going to use just whatever sounds iTunes thinks will work, and it usually is just not right at all. It might just be like a very basic sounding piano or a cheesy sounding saxophone or something like that, but it will play, but it's not like regular audio. It's mainly there for the data. Um, and I've got about 20 tracks here that I would like to export and just show you how easily we can import this into a couple different DAWs. So I'm in Cubase right now, and I've got my locator. Oh, another thing to mention. When we export all of this information, in addition to the note data and the different track data, we are also going to get time signature and tempo information, which is very useful if you need to share from one session to another, or if you are trying to share with a collaborator or another studio or something like that. That information is very useful. So if you wanted to build a track ahead of time before going into the studio, and you've got maybe some tempo changes, or you have different time signature changes, and it would be something kind of complicated to do in the moment when you're at a recording studio and you don't want to spend the time when everyone's wanting to just focus on recording, you can build a MIDI file at home, and it doesn't matter if the studio uses Pro Tools and you have Logic. You can build a tempo map and a time signature map and basically build out your song on any DAW, and then export it as a MIDI file, not a WAV file. And you can import it into any other DAW, no matter what they're using, and that way they can use that information to do a more efficient recording session. Okay, so let's see. We're going to go, in order to export this, it's very simple. It's very much like exporting an audio file. We're going to say export. Instead of audio mixdown, or in Pro Tools they say bounce, we're going to say export MIDI file. Now it's going to ask me a couple of questions, and I'm just going to name it MIDI transfer. That's okay. And it's going to ask, do I want to export all of these different things? And automation, inserts, sends, markers, we'll just export all that. Okay. And you can also have it export as a single track, or you can have it export as multiple tracks. And where you may want a single track is, let's say you have a bunch of string parts and you want to export it as a single string part track, uh, then you might choose to export it all as a single file. But I wanted to export all my individual MIDI events. Okay, and now I'm going to go into Pro Tools, and I just have a blank session here. It's just got a just totally stock. There's nothing loaded. And all I have to do is create a session, and I'm going to say import MIDI. And I'm going to select that MIDI file, and you'll see that it allows me to select it and hit open. And it's going to ask me, again, it's going to give me some questions. Do I want new tracks, or do I want it to go to the clip list? And right here it's asking, do I want the tempo map? Yes. Do I want the key signature? Yes. The location, there may be certain times where maybe you're just importing part of a song. Like I had a project I was part of last year, and after we did all the recording, the client came back and said, hey, we want to add this bridge. So they sent the MIDI, and we had to import that at the bar, wherever that was. Maybe it was bar 50 or something like that. So you can, rather than having to drag it, you can just have it drop in right where you want it. But I'm just going to have it go to the session start, and I'm going to hit OK. And voila, there is all of my MIDI that was once in Cubase. It is now in Pro Tools, and it has my track names. It's got my tempo, all that good stuff. And this now in Pro Tools, it doesn't load in any sounds. So if I wanted to have sounds, I would have to create an instrument and assign those two sounds. But it's great to have that data. And also, it's nice having it if, let's say, I was going to record some live instruments over this file. I kind of have my visually, I know what's happening in the song. Whereas if I was just working with a WAV file, it's a lot harder to see. And so I can see, and I could even build my markers based on what I'm seeing here. And so visually, it can be very nice to know what's going on with your song. So that's basically it for Pro Tools. Now I'm going to show you a different bit of software called Finale. And Finale is music notation software. Now remember, MIDI is kind of this flexible thing, and different programs can interpret it in different ways. So I am going to just say open and go to my documents where I have this. And I can select, instead of opening a Finale file, I can just open a MIDI file. And Finale, because it's music notation, it has a lot of questions for you. Let's see, tracks become staves, which means individual lines, yes. And then tempo changes, yada, yada, yada. And then here is important in Finale, quantization settings. If you have like relaxed quantization on your MIDI, or if it's randomized where it's like not quite on the beat, you can make the quantization settings so that the maximum value is a 16th note or a 32nd note. And that way, when it imports it, like, do we want mixed rhythms, or do we want just, you know, very simple rhythms? Because depending on your song, if it's a pretty simple song, but you have it kind of relaxed, you might want to have it with strict quantization, because when it creates the notes, it'll create some really wild looking notes. Because again, it's making music notation. This isn't software really to play back. This is more to look at visually, and we'll look at that in a second. So I don't think this song has any triplets in it. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to say 16th notes. Well, we'll just see what that looks like. And then it'll create percussion on channel 10, that's your standard general MIDI channel for percussion. And they'll create a different, and I can choose a different clef visually for percussion. That one is okay with me for this project. And then, you know, here again, you can say key signature, use the file, time signature, use the file. include all this extra MIDI data, and I'm gonna hit OK. And look, I've got music notation for my song. Now, obviously, it doesn't look great, but instead of having to copy this in, let's say I wanted to hire, I'll just play the tracks you can hear. It's kind of a horror thing. It's a little scary. So like I've got this this cool percussion, right? Let's say I wanted to hire some real drummers to come into the studio and play over those parts. Well, it would be very hard for them to read this. But if I create a track inside Finale, I could take this and make a chart for them to see. And it would be a whole lot better and make my session a lot faster than trying to have them play by ear or have them play by, just looking at a screen or something. I can actually take that MIDI data and make sheet music to give them. And it makes it a really easy way. A lot of time when I'm writing music and I have a musician come in, I have already created my file, and then I just drop MIDI into here, and I would definitely clean this up to look more professional before giving it to a musician to read. But just to show you how easy it was to transfer it from my session into here, and then it's exactly right. It's exactly the notes that you played in your session are exactly the same as here. Okay, and then I can show you even, we won't save that. I can open up a project like, I don't know, something that I've been working on. Let's see what this is. Okay, so here's a little percussion piece I was working on. And something that I wanted to do inside Finale because I wanted it to be played by live players. But let's say I wanted to layer in some good sounding percussion on top of this. What I can do is I can say export as a MIDI file. And we'll save it as Addison and Clark documents, which Addison and Clark, by the way, is a Wrigley Field where the Cubs play reference for all of those of you who don't know. All right, so we'll save that, and then here it's going to ask you format 0 means it's going to save everything as a single track. Format 1 is separate tracks. And we also, do we want a tempo map? No. Okay, that'll work. So it's going to export all that. And then inside Pro Tools, I can say new session. And we'll name it Addison and Clark. We'll put it inside this little project folder I created. And we can do the exact same thing, import MIDI, Addison and Clark, import. And because of the way that I did the session, everything is on a single track. But there is my MIDI data, okay? And I could go in and edit this. I could assign sounds to this. And I could use this. Let's say I wrote it inside Finale, and now I want to record. I could have this in the background while my live players record, so I can see what they're playing in relation to the MIDI that I created, and I can assign my cool sounding samples to it as well. And then the same goes here. We could close this session, and in Cubase, you can just import a MIDI file directly. We'll say Addison and Clark, and need to make sure I'm saving everything in the right place. That's another important thing to keep track of, right? Might take a second. And there's that same lovely file. Okay? And so I could go in. Now, you'll notice that inside Cubase, it actually did assign some sounds. Let's see what the sounds sound like. obviously not great sounds, but it recognized that it's drum instruments, and it tried its best to give you something to listen to. One other thing to mention is, like, if I go and find that MIDI file, let's see here, documents, it's in here somewhere, and I double click on this, it might try to play it inside, let's see, open with, I was hoping I could play it in iTunes. Let's see if I double click what happens. Oh, never mind. Forget about that. I was going to try to open it inside iTunes, but it wants me to. Well, what it would sound like is the exact same as this because it's going to use general MIDI. But anyway, pretty cool stuff. So remember, MIDI files, they're not audio, they're document files. And they allow us to transfer our MIDI seamlessly back and forth between different DAWs. Another thing to mention is the MIDI files are really small, so they're easy to email, they're easy to transfer. It's not like a audio file, which is very large and might require a file transfer. So be aware of using your MIDI to transfer your information, your MIDI data. Use it to create more efficient sessions. Use it to your advantage if you need to go in between DAWs or if you're collaborating. And if you wanted to go in and make some sheet music, it's a very powerful tool to be aware of. Okay, so that's MIDI files, and be looking for my my audio files video coming up soon as well.